My name's Graeme Gillespie. I was born in Bethlehem Hospital in Caulfield, in Melbourne. I'm originally from Melbourne, Australia. Graeme Gillespie is a 60-year-old bloke who's very passionate about nature and conservation, and has spent pretty much his entire life either working towards or in some capacity to try and make the world a better place in terms of biodiversity and nature conservation. My dad's name is John and my mother's name is Estelle. My younger sister's name is Margaret and my older sister is Penny. Both my mum and dad grew up in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne. And they're around about the same age. I think mum's 2 years younger than dad. And it was quite common in the post-war years for people to go to Europe for a holiday. They'd go by ship. And my mum and dad happened to be on the same ship going out to England in the early 1950s. And these were 6-week cruises, and they were very social affairs. And they got introduced to each other because they had the same surname. And it's not a common surname. They're not related to each other. And as a result of that started a friendship. And they saw each other off and on over the next few years, and then eventually became a couple when they moved back to Melbourne some 2 years later, and eventually got married. I think I always had a flair, but I think I always had a predisposition. I was always fascinated with creepy crawly things in the garden at home in Melbourne. But our family had a farm and we'd go and spend time there in the holidays. And I remember at a very early age, there was this distinction I made between the farm being a place of nature and wilderness and wildlife, and the city being dead and not being interesting. And so I'd miss the farm when I was in the city. And at the farm, we had access to animals, domestic animals, sheep and cattle dogs and that sort of stuff. But there was wildlife there. There were frogs, there was fish in the creek, and that just inspired me. And my older sister as well. She was also very interested in nature as well. My grandfather was a surveyor, and he, I think, encouraged us as well. He was interested in plants. He was interested in botany. And he was a very keen gardener, and I think that also helped us in terms of encouraged us to sort of explore nature more deeply. I always wanted to bring frogs and lizards home from the farm, and Mum and Dad allowed me to do that. So I had a menagerie at home. I wanted to keep tropical fish, they let me do that as well. They drew the line at blue ring octopuses and venomous snakes, but as a result, I had this passion right through my formative years in wildlife. And that slowly took the shape of being a passion for conserving wildlife and conserving forests and conserving the environment. Well, I guess it depends on your values and your perspectives. I've got friends who are into vintage cars, and they would see themselves as being the custodians of those vehicles, and at some point they'll pass them on to somebody else. In our case, we feel that we're just the latest in a chain of, whether it be people or forces that are responsible for managing or maintaining or looking after this particular place in line with our values. 50 years ago, the people that owned this land, their values weren't the same as mine. They were logging the country and running cattle through it and whatever else. But our values are around biodiversity conservation. So for us, being a custodian is about helping this forest to heal itself, to recover from past disturbances and reach its full potential. And eventually we will hand this on to somebody else, because we won't be able to continue to be the custodians forever. And then somebody else will have the custodian responsibility. Well, first of all, I guess there's a recognition that that's what it is, that you are a custodian. So, for example, other people who own land would consider themselves to be the rightful owners of that land. That's a different philosophy. We own this land legally under the Australian legal system, but we certainly don't own this land in the view of the First Nations people, and we certainly don't own this land in the view of all the other organisms that live here. The millions of organisms that live on this land, they certainly don't recognise us as being the owners. And we won't be the owners at some point in the future. That's the reality. So when you look at it that way, by definition, we are custodians whether we like it or not. So you don't choose to be a custodian. You are a custodian. It's just a question of whether or not you recognise that, whether or not you've got the modesty to see it that way, as opposed to the arrogance of saying, this is my land and I'm going to do what I damn well like. Sorry about the accent. Well, this is, whether you it's a philosophy, and whether you choose to see it that way, or whether you choose to believe that you actually do have a legal right to own the land and do whatever you want to it while you own it, which clearly a lot of people do. And often land ownership is tied in with livelihood. It's a business, farming, forestry, whatever it is. So people are making money off the land, so it's part of their livelihood, which entrenches that view that I have a vested interest in making sure that I have control of what happens on this land. And so that's understandable, and that there's 7,000 or 8,000 years of human culture that underpin that. Ever since agriculture was discovered in the 4 or 5 places on the planet where it was first discovered, that's become those cultural seeds were sown, and then at some point it was inevitable that the concept of land ownership would probably arise, and it's deeply ingrained in Western culture. But it's not ingrained in many indigenous cultures. That's a good question. It comes down to personal values. On one level, it's about personal values. But I guess being a scientist, hopefully one looks at the bigger picture and looks at it objectively as well, impartially as well, and deep down we know, we have evidence that our species depends on a healthy natural environment, the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the resources we depend on. Yet our species is doing its darndest as we speak to undermine all of those environmental services that we depend on. And we're heading towards a massive crash. Climate change is just one symptom. There are many other symptoms. And so it's not just about the intrinsic value that we as individuals might place on nature. It's not just about those of us that think or believe that nature has a right to exist intrinsically, not at the behest of humans. It's also the knowledge that our entire planet as a functioning system depends on it, which is almost a strategic business decision. It's not about my values. That's actually just common sense. And so I think that there are a number of strong arguments as to why being a custodian is important. Ultimately, every human on the planet is a custodian, whether they are aware of it or not. They're only here for a short period of time. They have a footprint on the planet, and they each have to choose, if they can choose, what the nature and size of that footprint is, what they leave behind when they finish up and go wherever they go. I've lived probably most of my life in Melbourne. Far east Gippsland in the eastern tip of Victoria for a few years. A little bit of time off and on in Indonesia, specifically Sulawesi. Darwin, Northern Territory for about 9 years. And now northeastern New South Wales for the last 15 months or so. My CV says I've got a PhD in zoology, and it says I've spent about 35, probably 38 years now in various organisations across Australia and internationally working on research projects and on management projects around endangered species and around trying to protect forests and ecosystems from damage. Danny's my partner and my soulmate. We've been together for a bit over 16 years now. She's the most important person in the world to me.
Why is that?
No idea. She's very attractive. We have a very similar values and a very common interest and passion in what we do. We've actually worked together nearly all of our, well, for most of that 16 years we met through work at Zoos Victoria, at Melbourne Zoo. And when we moved to the Northern Territory, I was technically her boss. And that was fine, we handled that really well. We now work for the same large organisation, but I'm not her boss anymore, which is probably a good thing. She's definitely her own boss now, in that sense. So we work in a similar field. We complement each other. She's got strengths and skills that I don't have, and so that complementarity I think is really powerful. But the other thing I'd say is that we, rightly or wrongly, we never tire of each other's company. She doesn't bore me, and so I think, and I've never really tried to analyse that, but we're good together. Yeah. Oh, there's not any one thing. It's just Danny. I love Danny. She's got a great walk, she's got a great laugh, she's got a great smile, she's a great cook. Almost as good as me. And yeah, I mean, she keeps me on the straight and narrow. She supports me. I feel my life is, it sounds like a bit of a cliche, but my life is full with her around. It's complete with her around. The Rainforest retreat is a bit under a square kilometre of forest in northeastern Victoria, sort of inland from Nambucca Heads, and it's a combination of lowland subtropical rainforest and tall wet eucalypt forest. It has a lovely creek system flowing through it with a series of waterfalls and cascades, and it's our home. We've got a little cottage here, off the grid solar cottage, and a very small clearing around the house, but basically it's inside the forest, and it's our home. So as I said before, I mean, I think we both get a lot of fulfillment, a lot of joy out of being close to nature, being surrounded by nature. And so this place definitely ticks that box. But this place also is special. The forests are spectacular, they're beautiful, but they're also a home to a lot of threatened species of animals and plants. Very diverse. We've recorded over 120 bird species here, we've recorded over 125 tree species here, a bunch of threatened species are here. And so this place gives us opportunity to directly, with our own hands, help conserve something and help it recover from past disturbances, as I mentioned. This area was selectively logged probably in the 60s and 70s, and even before that the red cedar cutters were up here last century or the century before last with their bull oaks pulling out these massive red cedars out of these rainforest gullies. So there's a long history of post-European disturbance in these forests. So, you know, they need to rest, they need to recover. And we see that as being part of our responsibility, part of our role as custodians of this place. So one of the first things that we did when we acquired this property was to put a conservation covenant on the property. This is a legal instrument in New South Wales legislation that is a contract which essentially gives this land outside of the footprint of the cottage the same level of protection as a national park, in a sense. So that even when we pass this property on to somebody else, they legally cannot not protect it. They are obliged legally to fulfill the same contractual obligations that we've signed up for. So that means it's in perpetuity. So unless that legislation is changed in the future, then that's, at the very least, that's a big part of our legacy. Well, I'll start with the best advice I've been given. I think the best advice I was ever given was from my dad, and that's maybe a cliche as well, but he used to tell me when I was a teenager, when I was not applying myself at school, being lazy and distracted by the lowest common denominator in the class, as was often written on my school reports, to always keep your options open. Even if you don't know what you're going to do, even if you don't know where you're going to be in a year's time or 10 years' time, decisions you make now that close off options are going to come back and bite you. Make decisions now which will maximise your options, not limit them. Now, he was talking about study and applying myself, but that is something which really stuck with me. He was right. And somehow or other I did manage to keep my options open, and I have been able to jump track and have new experiences that I never would have conceived of because I had those options. So I really appreciate that advice. Have any regrets? Oh, like everyone's got the benefit of hindsight and looks back on their lives and wish they'd done some things differently. But I don't have any significant regrets. I feel like I've been very, very fortunate. In the early part, in the 1980s when I started my career, this was a very, very small profession. There were very few opportunities for people that wanted to work with wildlife or wanted to work in environmental conservation. It was a relatively new thing. There wasn't much government infrastructure. Now there's a whole range of different jobs, roles, both in government, in the commercial sector, in the mining sector, in non-government organisations. There's lots and lots of options. And so my first job, my first kickstart was completely serendipitous. I was literally I was still at university, and I met some guys who were working, they were professional wildlife ecologists working with the government, and they invited me to do volunteer work with them, and it was through that volunteer work that I ended up getting my first gig. which was a 2-month gig. And then that gig led to another 2-month gig, and then a 12-month gig. And it went from there. And if I hadn't have met those guys on that riverbank that day, I don't know where my life would have ended up. And I've had other opportunities, being in the right place at the right time, which have shanghaied me off into some other direction. In the year 2000, I got a random email from someone saying, do you know anybody who might be interested in going and doing a reptile and amphibian survey in Indonesia? And I said, yeah, me. And the next thing I know, I spent 3 or 4 months of each year for the next 6 years in a remote corner of Sulawesi discovering new species and learning Indonesian culture and having an incredible adventure and gaining very big insights into third world problems, which were very different from first world problems. So I feel like I've been incredibly fortunate, and I try to share the perspectives that that's given me with students and with my younger staff who are coming up through the ranks behind me as often as I can. I guess if I've got regrets, they're not personal regrets, they're collective regrets. That we, as a force, the environmental movement as a force, in its different shapes and sizes and forms across the world, have failed to really have a big impact on the direction that humanity's going. Australia's a wealthy country, it's a well-educated country. The Great Barrier Reef has been a World Heritage Site for I don't know how long. It's a major tourist attraction, lots of people making money out of it. It's highly valued by everybody in the country. No one would say they don't care about the Great Barrier Reef, yet we're destroying it. And that's one example. There are lots of examples. We've been fighting the battle to get more sustainable forest management on the eastern seaboard of Australia my entire life. You know, the Daintree and Tasmanian and Arundel Plateau protests were going on from the late 1970s, from when I was in school. Part of my awakening as an environmental person was through that. Yet, we're still logging those forests. I think the thing that gives me the most fulfillment is being in places like this where I feel like I've got where I feel like I'm surrounded by what to me is beauty, which is nature. Beautiful forests, beautiful trees, beautiful animals. The sounds of nature, not the sounds of civilization. And on top of that, feeling like I'm doing something useful, like I'm doing something valuable for the future. I have a strong sense of custodianship, and it's not about owning something, it's not about having something, it's actually about nurturing something. And that is very rewarding for myself and my partner Danielle. I think the things that really upset me well, certainly seeing habitat destruction, particularly loss of tropical rainforests. They are such a thing of indescribable complexity and beauty. And if you know a bit about tropical rainforests, you know that they've taken tens of thousands, if not in some cases millions of years to become into existence. And we have the capacity to undo that in a matter of hours. And you can't bring that back. And so knowing what I know, that's just soul destroying. And whether it's tropical rainforests or wet, tall eucalypt forests on the east coast of Australia, or the Great Barrier Reef, or even savanna woodlands in northern Australia, we are destroying all these incredible habitats on a large scale, not just bits and pieces, not just postage stamps, really, really large scale. And there's so much loss of opportunity. So that makes me very sad. And because I've spent so much of my life and energy trying to reduce that, trying to interrupt it, and made so few gains, that motivates me. That motivated me to want to find a place that I could have some control over myself, and at least feel that there's one corner of this planet where I've got a big say in its persistence beyond, in its conservation. Probably like everybody else, it's the actions of people that make me angry. And the actions of people that make me angry are those actions which are self-interested and malicious and destructive, either to other people or to the environment. So blatant commercial gain at the expense of the environment is totally unacceptable. It's not necessary. There are always trade-offs. There are always pathways that responsible organisations or individuals can take where they can tread lightly on the land. They can do things in an ecologically sensitive way. They can still extract resources. They can still farm. You can still harvest timber. You can still fish without doing it in a malicious, entirely exploitative, selfish way. That angers me. And in my working life, I meet people with different agendas from me. And unfortunately, sometimes those people, because they've got different values from me, you have to work very, very hard to try and counterbalance what they're trying to achieve. Well, at the moment, what makes me content is removing weeds, seeing seedlings spring up in their place, rainforest seedlings spring up in their place, planting out rainforest seedlings that I've grown from seeds or small seedlings, sitting on the veranda and just seeing different bird species, hearing different insects, the sounds of nature, especially with a nice glass of red wine in my hand. I think that to me is a very content feeling. Oh, the best sandwich. That's an easy one. You get white bread, right? And you put as much butter on each slice of bread as you can. And then you get those little cooking chocolate droplets, the dark cooking chocolate droplets, the cooking chocolate droplets. And you just cake one piece of bread with them, and then you push them into the butter. And then you get the other piece of bread and you do the same thing, and you put that together. And that is the best sandwich on the planet. It's the most unhealthy sandwich on the planet, but that's the best sandwich on the planet. I haven't eaten one since I was about 15 years old, but yeah.
That does not sound good at all. What's one thing you own that you really should throw out?
That I do own?
Yep.
Oh, there's probably a few old socks that I've kept too long.
What's the scariest animal?
That's easy. The saltwater crocodile. I'm a herpetologist, which is someone who studies reptiles. I'm entirely comfortable with handling venomous snakes, all kinds of critters. But I spent 9 years working on the Northern Territory. I have such a huge amount of respect for those crocodiles. The big ones have been around a long time. And they're smart, and they're powerful, and they're fast. And nobody that's been attacked by a saltwater crocodile saw the animal coming. So they are one scary beast. They're something to stay away from.
Apples or oranges?
I often have an apple and an orange for lunch. Probably apples, yeah.
Have you ever asked someone for their autograph?
No.
What do you think happens when we die?
We decompose. We decompose. We just go just like any other animal, any other organism. We just decompose. We rot. If you're asking what happens to our conscious sense of who we are, it just ceases to exist. Soul. Our soul is just a layperson's name for who we think we are, our sense of identity, and yeah, it's a product of a complex, amazingly complex biochemical system. So yeah, it is as sad as it may sound, it just ceases to exist.
Do you have a favorite action movie?
Oh yeah, Mad Max, the first Mad Max film. It was filmed, it came out when I was at an age that was, I think I was 16 when the first Mad Max movie came out, and it was a new thing. And it was filmed on the country roads around where our family farm was. So I knew where the scenes were, and that made it even better.
What's your favorite smell?
Oh, it's probably roast chicken.
What's your least favorite smell?
Oh, blue vein cheese, without a doubt. It just about make me gag.
Exercise, worth it?
It is, yeah, very much so. I don't do as much as I like. I do a fair bit of walking, especially on this property, and that keeps me fit. And a lot of other bits and pieces around here, whether it be chopping wood or lifting things or pulling things. And I've lapsed a bit in the last 12 months, but I'm a swimmer.
Flat or sparkling?
Sparkling.
What's the most used app on your phone?
Probably, if I'm being really honest, it's probably Facebook.
You get one song to listen to for the rest of your life. What is it?
It's Pink Floyd, and it's probably I'm not sure I actually know the name of the track, but there's a particular track on the Dark Side of the Moon album which I reckon I could listen to indefinitely.
What number am I thinking of?
42.
Describe the rest of your life in 5 words.
5 words. Do as much good as I can. That's more than 5 words, I know, but yeah. Do as much as I can.
Still 6.
Do as much as possible.
Window or aisle?
Window. Who asked you? The question was?
There you go. Thank you, sir.
A pleasure.